I have hauled worse things than salt across worse skis, and I have never once been asked my name at the end of a run. That is the shape of the work. You lift, you carry, you set down, you sign. A man can spend 20 years like that and never leave a fingerprint on anything. I came down onto Nur in the last of the wet season, with the rain going sideways across the landing shelf and my hold empty, except for 4 crates of medical alcohol nobody wanted anymore. I was not there to buy. I want that understood, because of everything that came after. I was there because a broker named Hulveth Sarn owed me 900 marks for a haul of copper wire, and Hulveth Sarn had stopped answering his relay. And a man who has been stiffed enough times learns that the only letter that gets read is the one you deliver standing up. The green vault is what the Gatari call the ruin. Before them it was a temple, or a granary, or a place where somebody's grandmothers were buried. Nobody knows and nobody has looked. It is a broad terraced hill of black stone swallowed to the waist in rainforest, with a stairway 200 paces wide climbing out of the trees, and at the top of that stairway a floor where the roof used to be. The canopy grew back over the gap, and now the light comes down through it in long green columns, thick with insects, thick with the steam that comes off the stone when the rain stops. It is beautiful. That is the ugly part. It is genuinely, indefensibly beautiful, and they hold the auctions there because the light makes everything look like it deserves to be sold. I climbed the stairs with rain still in my collar, and my boots printing wet up the whole length of them. There were maybe 80 at the auction. Gatari, mostly tall, loose-jointed, that way they have of standing that makes you think of a bird deciding whether to bother with you. A knot of Vel buyers under an awning, small and pale and wrapped in their trade coats, passing a slate between them and never once looking at the floor. Some freelancers. Some men like me who were only there because someone owed them. They were selling machine parts when I got there. Then a debt-bonded family of 4, and I looked at my boots for that, which is not the same as doing anything, and I know it. Then they brought out the cage. It came up on a cart hauled by 2 of Sarn's men, and the crowd made the noise a crowd makes for a thing it has seen before. Not surprise. A kind of comfortable groan. Somebody laughed. The cage was old and it was ornate. Whoever built it had cared about it. The bars were forged in a twist like rope, and the corner posts had been finished with little cast leaves at the top, and at some point in the last 100 years the leaves had gone green with rot and nobody had cleaned them. There is something in that I have never gotten out from under my ribs. The bars were beautiful. It was a beautiful cage. She was sitting in it with her back against the far bars, and she did not move when the cart stopped. I had never seen a Sohari before. I have seen a good many species, and most of them arrange themselves close enough to the human plan that you can read a face if you spend a week on it. She was slate blue, the color of a knife left out in the weather, and her eyes were large and dark and reflective as a deep-water fish's, with a thin ring of copper around the iris that caught the green light and threw it back. Her ears came to a point and lay flat back along her skull. Her hair had been cropped down to a black stubble that grew in with a faint green sheen, and it had been cropped by someone who did not like her, because it was uneven, and one place above her temple had been taken down to the skin. She wore what they had given her, which was a gray shift, and she wore it the way a person wears a thing that has nothing to do with them. Her ankle was chained, not to the cage, to a ring set in the cart, which meant the cage could be opened and she would still be there. Sarn came up onto the block. I had never seen his face, only his relay signature, and the face turned out to be exactly what the signature had led me to expect: long, amused, and entirely at peace with itself. Lot 41, he said. He said it in trade cant and then again in Gatari for the pleasure of it. Held property, papers clean, provenance of 91 years standing. He put his hand flat on the twisted bars, casual, the way you touch your own gatepost. You know her. Everybody knows her. Somebody's queen. That got the laugh. A real one this time, rolling, and it went on longer than it needed to, and a Gatari near me wiped his eye. Sohari Reach, Sarn said. Dead house, dead line, dead world. She has been on this floor 11 times. She has been to Kessel Rim and back. She was in a private collection on Trill for 19 years and the collector's daughter sold her to pay a gambling account. He let that sit. There is no ransom. There is no family. There is no fleet. There is nothing behind her and there never was. What there is, and he rapped the bar with one knuckle, is a queen and some men would like to own a queen. I looked at her while he said all of it. She did not flinch. She did not close her eyes. She looked out past the bars at the middle distance at nothing, at the wet green light, and her face was as still as the stone under her. But I had been a corpsman on a hospital hull for 11 years before I ever touched a freight yoke, and I have watched a great many people be talked about while they were in the room. There is a thing that happens in the throat, a small one once when a word lands. The word that landed was nothing. I am not a good man in any way that would show on paper, but I have been on the wrong end of a room, and I know what it costs to sit still in one. The bidding started at 40 marks. It got to 60 and stalled, because the bell ring under the awning was not bidding, and everyone was waiting to see if they would, and they were enjoying not bidding. One of the Gattari called out something about her age and the crowd went again. Sarn spread his hands like a man being generous. He said the trouble with a queen was that a queen has to be fed, and there was a third round of it. Then he said, "She has not spoken in 4 years. That is a selling point, gentlemen," and he grinned at the cage, and he waited for her to give him something. She gave him the middle distance. Nobody bought her. The Vel finally moved their slate and bought a lot of hull plating instead, and the cart was hauled off to the low terrace where they keep the unsold stock under the trees, and the auction went on, and I stood there with 900 marks in unpaid freight in my breast pocket, and a taste in my mouth like a coin. I got my money out of Sarn that evening, 600 of it and a lie about the rest, and a drink poured out of a bottle he was proud of. He was good company. That is the thing people never understand about men like him. He asked about my ship. He asked whether I had ever run the Osuwar corridor and told a story about a pilot who had, and it was a funny story, and I laughed, and I hated the sound of it coming out of me. At the door I said, "The one in the cage, does she get water?" Sarn looked at me for a moment with real curiosity, the way you'd look at a dog that had said something. "She gets what she's worth," he said, and then because he was not a fool and had made a living reading men's faces, he added easily, "She's watered, Das. She's fed. I'm not a butcher. She's an asset." "An asset," I said. 91 years of upkeep. You do the arithmetic. Every day she doesn't sell, she costs me. He shrugged, and the amusement came back over him like water closing. That is the whole tragedy if you want one. Nobody wants a queen. They want to have wanted one. I went down to the low terrace after dark with my canteen. It was not brave. I want to be exact about this, because in the years since I have heard the story told back to me with a shape it never had. It was not brave. There was no guard on the unsold stock, because where would it go? The trees go on for 1,100 kilometers and the only way off Nur is the shelf, and the shelf is watched. There was one lamp on a hook, burning yellow, throwing the twisted bars in long stripes across the ground. She was sitting the same way, back to the far bars, ankle chained. The rain had started again, and it was coming down through the canopy in fat drops, one at a time, and one of them was hitting the top of her shoulder every few seconds, and she was not moving out from under it. I stopped about 4 paces off, because a man who walks straight up to a cage in the dark is telling you something about himself. "I've got water," I said. "Nothing. It's clean. It's from my ship. I'm not going to tell you it's good, because it's been in a tank for 6 weeks, but it's clean." The drop hit her shoulder. I sat down, on the wet ground at 4 paces with my back against a root the size of my chest, because standing over a cage is also telling somebody something. I unscrewed the canteen and I drank from it myself first, a real swallow, and then I set it down where the lamplight ran out and pushed it forward with my foot, and I sat back. I'll leave it, I said. Whether you take it has nothing to do with me. Then I shut up. That was the whole of my contribution to the moral history of the galaxy. I sat in the mud in the dark for about 40 minutes and did not talk to her, and did not look at her, and let the rain do what rain does. When I finally got up to go, she had not moved, and the canteen had not moved. I left it there. In the morning, it was inside the bars, empty, sitting upright on the flat of the cart, and she was watching me come down the terrace with those flat dark eyes and the copper ring in them, and I understood that she had waited until she could not be seen doing it. That is a thing they do not tell you about 91 years. It is not that a person stops wanting water. It is that they stop being willing to be seen wanting anything. I picked up the canteen. I filled it from my own supply and I set it back down at the same distance and I said, Merk das, freight, I'm here 3 days on a repair. I went and did the repair. There was no repair. My starboard scrubber was fine. I sat in the port office and paid a Qatari mechanic 40 marks to file a form saying my scrubber was not fine, and he took the money without any expression whatsoever, because on Nur that is a transaction so ordinary it does not even carry a name. Second day she spoke. I had come down in the afternoon with the canteen and a tin cup, an enamel thing gone chipped down to the metal at the rim, which had been in my galley since before I owned the ship. I set the cup inside the bars, the first time I had put my hand through them, and I poured into it, and I put the canteen back on my belt and sat down at 4 paces. Her voice, when it came, was low and wrecked and unhurried. She said, "You want to be the one." I said, "The one what?" "The one who was kind." Her eyes did not move off me. 91 years, there is always one. He comes with bread or a blanket or a word. He sits where you are sitting. He tells himself a story about what he is doing, and in the story he is not one of the 80 men on the stair. Her mouth moved very slightly. It was not a smile. Then the bidding goes to 200 and he is not there. Drink your water, human, go home. The rain came down through the leaves. I sat with that a while because it was true and because I have never been quick. "You're probably right," I said. Her eyes narrowed minutely. "I don't know what I'd do at 200, I said. "I've got 600 marks in my coat that Sarn owes me and I've been hauling 9 years to be able to say a sentence like that. I don't know what I'd do. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'd be brave because you've heard that from better liars than me and you're still in there." I nodded at the cup. "But I'm not going to take the water back either. It's yours. It was yours when I put it down." She looked at the cup for a long moment. Then she picked it up in both hands. Her hands shook not much, and not from fear. She was a long time out from anything that could be called fear. They shook the way hands shake at 70 or 80 of anything. She drank it in 3 swallows and set the cup down exactly where it had been, so that nothing could be said about it. "Ayan," she said. "That your name. It is the part of it that is mine." I came back the 3rd day, and the 4th, because the mechanic's form said 7 days and I was, it turns out, a coward in a different direction than I had expected. She talked to me from the far bars, and she never came closer, and I never went nearer than 4 paces, and in that way we assembled something. The Sohari Reach had been 11 worlds and had lasted 900 years and had ended in a single season, and she did not tell me how, and I did not ask, and I have not looked it up since, and I am not going to. Her mother had ruled it and her mother's sister had ruled it before that. She had been 42 when it went, young, for a Sohari. They run long, and she had been on a ship in the middle of it, and the ship had been taken by people who had no idea what they had. And by the time anybody worked it out, she was already property. And property is a very hard thing to stop being, because the papers move faster than the truth. "The first 20 years, she said, I told them who I was. And it raised the price." She said it flatly and let me sit in it. "Then I stopped," she said, "and they put it back on the papers themselves because it raises the price." She turned her hand over in her lap and looked at it. Do you understand, Das? They do not cage me because I am a queen. They cage me because a queen is the only thing about me that anyone can want. If I were nobody, they would have set me down in a field 40 years ago and let me walk into the trees and die there like a person. Her jaw moved. That is what I would have had. A field and the walking and the dying. It is more than I have had. I did not have anything to say to that. I sat there and let the insects burn themselves on the lamp, and after a while I said the only thing I had, which was the truth. I don't want a queen, I said. I wouldn't know what to do with one. I've got a ship with a bad scrubber that isn't bad and a hold that smells like alcohol and 9 years of runs and no house anywhere. I couldn't buy you if I sold everything I owned down to the boots. I looked at her, and I made myself keep looking, because I had spent 4 days looking mostly at the ground. You keep waiting for me to want something. I'm 41 years old and I have wanted things my whole life, and every one of them costs somebody. I came down here with water because you were thirsty. That's all it was. That's all it's been. The lamp hissed. That is the most dangerous thing anyone has said to me in 91 years, Ayan said. On the 5th day, the Vel came down to the low terrace to look at her, because there was a private sale being arranged, and I was standing there when they did it. They were 4. They wore the trade coats and carried the slate, and they walked around the cart on all sides, and one of them crouched to look at the ring on her ankle and thumbed the pin of it to see how it seated, and another asked Sarn a question about her joints. Sarn answered it. Sarn answered it with the exact patient competence of a man selling a good used engine. Her knees, he said, were sound. Her hearing had gone slightly on the left. She sat still. She looked out past all of them at the trees. And the Vel, who was crouched by the ankle ring, reached through the bars and took her by the chin to turn her face into the light. I do not remember crossing the ground. I remember Sarn's hand flat on my chest, and Sarn's voice very close and very reasonable, saying my name twice, saying Das, no, and I remember my own hand around the Vel's wrist, and the wrist being much thinner than I expected, like a bird's leg, and the whole terrace gone silent under the drip of the leaves. The Vel let go of her chin. He straightened and adjusted his coat and looked at me with polite bewilderment. He said something to Sarn in a language I do not have, and Sarn laughed and said something back, and whatever it was, it made the 4 of them turn and go up the terrace, unhurried, still talking, already elsewhere. Sarn kept his hand on my chest until they had gone. Then he took it off and wiped it on his coat and looked at me with something I had not seen on him before, which was disappointment, of a genuine kind. 900 marks, he said. 2 of my men, the port authority. Do you know how far you would have gotten? No. Nowhere. You would have gotten nowhere, and she would have watched. He put his hands in his pockets. Do you know what she costs me, Das? 11 marks a day. Water meal, the man who checks the ring. 4,000 marks a year for 91 years. She has cost me and my father's partner more than a ship. And every time somebody like you comes down here and gives her a drink out of a tin cup, she goes up 100 marks on the floor, because the story goes around because somebody wants her, and a thing that is wanted is a thing that is worth something. He said it without malice. That is what I could not get past. There was no malice anywhere in the man. You have raised her price twice this week. I should thank you. I'm not going to, because I liked you, and I am telling you instead, go home. He went up the terrace after the Vel. I stood there with my hands hanging. Behind me, from inside the twisted bars, in that low, wrecked voice, Ayan said, "Now you know." I did not turn around. I said, "Know what?" Why, I did not drink the first night. I went and sat on the wet stair in the dark for a long time, somewhere below the auction floor, where the temple steps go down into the trees and stop being steps and become just a hill. I did the arithmetic that Sarn had done. 600 marks in my coat, 400 and some in the ship's account, and the ship, which was worth perhaps 11,000 to somebody who did not look too hard at the scrubber. And a private sale being arranged with 4 men who had asked about her joints, and I did not know the number they had put on the slate, and I knew with total certainty that I could not reach it, and that if I could reach it I would have bought her, and that if I had bought her I would have owned her, and that on that day everything I had said to her at 4 paces would become a lie that she had already heard 91 years ago from better liars than me. That is the thing I want to set down plainly, because I have been called a good man for this, and I am not one. I did not free her because I was good. I freed her because I could not afford to be the last man in a long line of men who paid for her, and I have never in my life been able to stand in a line. The arc cutter was in a locker on my ship between a coil of feed hose and a box of fuses. I had used it twice in 9 years, both times on my own hull. It weighed as much as a full canteen, and it took a charged cell the size of my palm, and it would cut 16 millimeters of soft iron in about 40 seconds, and it was the single most ordinary object I owned. I went down to the low terrace at the hour before dawn on the 6th day, in the gray, with the rain stopped, and every leaf on Nur letting go of its water, one drop at a time, so that the whole forest sounded like a slow applause. There was still no guard. Where would she go? She was awake. I think she had been awake the whole night. She was sitting against the far bars, and when she saw the shape of the cutter in my hand she went very still, and her eyes went to it, and then to my face, and I watched a thing come up in her that I had not seen in 6 days and did not have a name for and have decided since was probably fear. Not of me, of the arithmetic, of what it would cost and who would pay it. She said, "Das." "Don't talk yet," I said. I knelt at the cart. The lock on the cage door was a good lock, and it was inside a housing, and it would have taken me 10 minutes. The chain was not a good chain. It was 16 millimeters of soft iron running from the ring on her ankle to a ring on the cart bed, and it was the cheapest thing in the entire assembly, because who spends money on the chain of a thing that has been chained for 91 years? I cut the cage door hinge first, 2 cuts. The metal went from black to orange to white, and the sound of it was a low-fat hiss, and the smoke smelled the way burning iron smells, like a struck match held too long. I set the door aside in the leaves. Then I put my hand through where the door had been, and I said, "I'm going to take hold of the chain, not you." And she watched my hand come, and she did not move her ankle away, which I understood even then was the largest thing she had done in a century. The chain took 40 seconds. When it parted, the cut end dropped and rang on the cart bed, and she jerked once, all through her, the way a body does when it has been braced against a weight that is suddenly gone. I stood up. My knees were bad and they cracked, and in the gray silence it sounded absurd. I stepped back 4 paces. Then I put the cutter on the ground, and I put my hands where she could see them, and I said the thing I had come down the terrace saying to myself all the way from the shelf. "The door's open," I said. "That's all I'm doing. I'm not carrying you, and I'm not walking you out, and I'm not taking you anywhere. My ship is on the 3rd pad, and it leaves at the tide whether you're on it or not, and if you're on it you're a passenger, and if you want to be put down on any world in the corridor I'll put you down there, and I'll never ask you a question." I heard my own voice go, and I let it. "You don't owe me a thing. You never did. There's no bill coming." She sat inside the open cage, with the free end of the chain lying against her leg. "They will hang you," she said. "Probably. There are 4,000 marks on that chain." "There's 11 on the cutter," I said. "It's a bad trade. I've made worse." "Das," she said it like a person putting down something heavy. 91 years. Do you know what is out there? The reach is gone. My house is gone. Everyone who could say my name in the old way has been dead for 60 years. Her hands were flat on the cart bed and they were shaking, and this time it was not age. If I walk out of this, I am not a queen. I am an old woman with no world in a forest on a moon. The light was coming up behind the canopy, and it came down in those long green columns, thick with steam, and it lay across the twisted bars and the little rotted cast leaves at the corners. "Yes," I said. She looked up at me. "That's what I'm offering," I said. "That's all I've got. It isn't a crown. It's a field and the walking." I have thought about that moment for a long time since, about the fact that I did not reach in, that I stood 4 paces off in the mud with my hands showing and my knees cracked, and let the terrible, ordinary weight of it be hers. There are men who would call that cruelty. She has told me since, once, in a kitchen with her back to me, that it was the only thing in 91 years that had ever been given to her without a hand still on it. She got up. It took her a long time. Her legs did not want it, and she used the twisted bars to do it, and I did not go and help her, and that was the hardest thing I have ever not done. She stood inside the cage with her hand on a corner post and the cast leaves under her palm, and she breathed, and she looked out through the space where the door had been at 1,100 kilometers of dripping trees. Then she stepped down out of the cart onto the ground of the low terrace, and she stood on her own feet on the wet black stone of a temple whose name nobody knows. The chain lay behind her in the cage. And of course they were coming, because the cutter is not a quiet tool, and the smoke of burning iron goes up through green leaves like a signal. Sarn came down the terrace with 2 of his men and the 4 Vel behind him in their trade coats, and the auction hands, and a tally boy of maybe 11 with the slate under his arm, and half the stair besides, because it was dawn on Nur and there was nothing else to see. Sarn stopped 10 paces up the slope. He looked at the cut hinge. He looked at the chain lying in the cage like something shed. He looked at me, and he did the arithmetic, and I watched him get to the end of it. "Das," he said tiredly, "you cannot afford her." "No," I said, "nobody can, that was the mistake." And I stepped back another pace, and I put my hands down at my sides, and I said to him, to all of them, in the flat voice of a man who has spent his life signing for other people's cargo, "She isn't mine, she isn't yours, she isn't a lot number. Nobody here is buying anything this morning." Sarn's hand went to his belt. One of his men started down the slope. And HFYStory turned around. Not toward me, toward them, toward the 80 faces on the stair and the 4 in the trade coats and the broker with his hand on his belt, and she stood on her own 2 ruined legs in a gray shift with her hair cropped to the skin above her temple, and she did not raise her chin the way they do in the stories, and she did not thunder, and there was no fleet in the sky. She simply looked at them, one after another, the way you look at a room you are leaving. And they stopped. I have turned this over for years and I do not have a clean explanation, and I have stopped wanting one. It was not majesty. It was not power. She had none. She has never had any again. I think it was only this, that every man on that hill had spent his life around things that could be bought, and had learned to read them the way you read weather, and that when a thing walks out of its cage and does not run, and does not beg, and does not look at the man who freed it, when it simply stands there being a person, there is no price on the slate for that, and the arithmetic fails, and a Gatari with his hand on his belt discovers he does not know what he is holding it for. The tally boy said something, just one word half under his breath, and I did not catch it, and I have never learned what it was. His slate was hanging forgotten at the end of his arm. Sarn took his hand off his belt. "Go on then," he said. He sounded more than anything exhausted. "Go on, there's nowhere to go." Ayan walked up the low terrace. She went slowly. Twice she stopped, and once she put her hand flat against a tree, and nobody moved to touch her and nobody moved to stop her. She went between the Vel in their coats, and one of them stepped back out of her path without seeming to decide to. She went past Sarn and did not look at him, and I saw the whole 91 years of it go across his face and find nowhere to land. At the top she stopped and turned, and looked back down the terrace at me, standing in the mud beside an open cage with an arc cutter at my feet, 41 years old, with a bad scrubber and no house anywhere. "Das," she said, her voice carried, she let it. "You ask me nothing." "No. Ask me something." Her hands were at her sides and they were shaking, and she let everyone see them shake. "Now, in front of them, ask me one thing. So that I can be a woman who was asked and answered." The forest dripped. I stood there and thought of the 80 men on the stair, and the 4,000 marks, and the 4 buyers, and every hand that had ever been laid on her chin to turn her face into the light, and of the one thing that in 91 years not one of them had ever needed to know. "Will you come to the ship," I said, "and tell me your whole name?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she came back down the terrace, past Sarn, past all of them, and she stopped in front of me at 4 paces, which was the distance we had built, and she closed it herself. "Ayin Veshtoru," she said, "daughter of Neshayin of the reach that was." She looked at me with those flat dark eyes and the copper ring in them catching the green morning. "It is not worth anything." "It isn't for sale," I said. "That's not the same thing." We walked out through the trees together, and behind us the cage stood open on the cart with the chain lying inside it, and I have been told that Sarn left it there for years, unsold, because nobody would take it, and that the leaves at the corner posts have gone on rotting to this day. We reached the shelf at the turn of the tide. She went up the ramp on her own feet, and she stood in my galley while I filled the chipped enamel cup from the tap, and she took it in both hands and drank it and set it down. "Thank you for the water," she said. She said it as though it were an ordinary sentence, which is exactly what it was, which is exactly why it took 91 years to arrive. I signed for nothing that day. I carried nothing and I set nothing down. And for the first time in 20 years at the end of a run, somebody knew my name.